Live,
Nice.
live, 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 live. We are live, guys and gals. We got Dark Phoenix on. This is my nickname for her, Dr. Sabine Hazen. Dr. Sabine Hazen, surprise out of left field. I just invited you. I said, hey, we have our conference. You should come. Boom. She bought tickets. It's so important that we save our sites, Dr. Hazen. And I know since COVID, you've been working a lot, actually a little bit pre COVID, you've been working on the sponsor side of your own Progena Biome. But before that, people don't realize, and you're still putting in the work. You have a full staff of clinical research coordinators, just like myself, Brad, Dr. Fox, and Chris, who's soon to join. You've been running sites, Ventura Clinical Trials, for over a decade, more than almost 2 decades.
Yeah.
So
More.
you're the perfect person to come to SOS. You're one of the perfect people to have on this show because this particular one of the things we're trying to address is inefficiencies of clinical research from the sponsor CRO site level. And as someone who has experience at the site level and the sponsor level, I mean, what are some things that aggravated you as a site owner? Like, is it sponsors? Is it CROs?
I think when the CROs, the CROs came, if you look back at the history of clinical trials, CROs started coming in probably about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, right then. I mean,
Late '90s, yeah,
yeah,
early,
yeah,
like mid to late '90s.
yeah. So I was starting to do them in 92. It was really PI and pharma. Like I remember we had a trial at University of Florida, and it was Merck. It was a Merck trial. I think it was on Remicade at the time. Can't remember, but anyways, we did so many trials, and it was the sponsor and the PI. That's it, you know. So yeah, I mean, and then CROs came in the middle of it. What I found interesting with CROs was really the fact that there was no responsibility, right? The PI was responsible because he could lose his license if he messed it up, right? The pharmaceutical company was responsible because they could lose money, but the CRO in the middle really no responsibility. So really, they could, if the trial goes great, they make money. If the trial doesn't, they make money. So really, but I think it becomes, over the years, what I've seen is a lot of nefarious activities on both the sponsor and the site. I mean, not the site, on both the sponsor and the CROs. Bills that don't get paid. Yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with that. PIs that do all the research, enroll the patients, the trial doesn't make it for whatever reason, it didn't work, right? The drug didn't work. And then all of a sudden, the PI doesn't get paid, but yet put in all the money, right? Paid all the vendors and paid the colonoscopies and all that. So that's what I find that's been a little bit nefarious in that field right now. Now, on the other hand, being the sponsor, I get an appreciation of the sponsor and the funding and the spending of money, right? Because you're spending it on a site and you expect them to produce, but they don't really produce and they're just spending money. So it's in a way, it's been a good balance for me to kind of appreciate the sponsor a bit more.
It's such a treat for me because myself and Chris is trying to get on, but we'll get you a link, Chris. Uh, I've known you for years, Chris. I mean, we've done like one-on-ones in your office. Like, you were so right about a lot of things. Brad and Dr. Fox, this is like their first intro to you, besides like maybe listening to one of our videos or something. But I'm so glad I get to like set this up because these are really good people to know in this space from site. And this is all about save our sites. Like, I think you brought up a lot of good points. I think sites are where the rubber meets the road. Like, we're the only patient advocates in this industry, if you think about it. Sponsors can't advocate for patients. They don't even know how. CROs, that's the last thing they want to do. So who's left? I mean, patient advocacy groups, but most of them don't do research.
And that, yeah, that was I was that doctor, right? I was that doctor that would get blacklisted by pharma because I advocated for the patient, right? If a patient is spitting up blood from the drug, You're giving them a puffer for their COPD and they're spitting up blood. And the sponsor doesn't even want to acknowledge that it could be from the drug and will not work it up. That's when my radar goes up, right? Because to me, it's like, listen, this patient volunteered to enter your study and he has a complication from your product. You need to take care of the patient. End of story, right? Because human beings are not guinea pigs, right? So I think that's what, that was the disconnect, is these problems that would occur from the IP. And instead of acknowledging the problem and working it up and making sure the patient is fine, these, sponsors would just, put it under the carpet and ignore it. And then go behind my back to the coordinator and say, oh, Dr. Hazan said to remove this, right? That's not okay. So, and how many times have things happened where, things get removed from the EDC? I remember I had a new coordinator and, there was a side effect that when I do my sign off of electronic medical records, which is something I encourage all the sites to do. These companies, they come at the last minute and they tell you got to sign off the sign off the case books, right? You've got to review every single side effects and adverse events on your chart and on the case book before closing the case books. Because here's the problem. If it doesn't match, you're on the hook, right? Because now let's say 10 years down the road, there's a problem with this drug and they go back and they say, how come it wasn't reported in the syllabus or in the electronic medical records? Then they go back to your chart because you're the original chart that you have to wait for 25 years to store it. And then they go, wait, Dr. Fox, why didn't your coordinator record the hemoptysis from the drug? We're now seeing it 10 years from now. And then you're going to say, I don't know what happened. It was supposed to be recorded. You signed off on those case books. By signing off on those case books, you're responsible. So you're on the hook and they're going to pin everything on you. So I'm sure that's what happened with all these vaccines, by the way. Side effects, adverse events, and everything. I wonder if somewhere, and the problem is, like, even if you do record it and you sign off on the case books, and then it goes somewhere in Philippines, electronic land, they can still delete it, in my opinion. So you're
Dr.
still
Hazan,
responsible.
this is a perfect example. We've been through CRO world for 20 years, and I think you've had experience before CRO world. Do you feel as though life now is more or less efficient than life without the CROs?
The CROs, really, it depends on the CRO. If it's an ethical CRO, you're fine. If it's a non-ethical CRO and they're just trying to, get more business from the pharmaceutical companies and they will do whatever the pharmaceutical companies will dictate. And I find those are basically the ones owned by venture capitalists. Remember, the venture capitalists control pharma. They control the CRO. They control the regulatory board. And now they're controlling a majority of the sites. Very few sites are out there that are independent. Again, if you look at the vaccine studies, they hired CRO-controlled sites to monitor the studies. So the venture capitalists are essentially controlling the whole research,
And that's a big trend right now. We talked about that. We call them site flippers. Sites sell their sites for millions of dollars to venture capitalists. They come through, make it
millions, not even millions.
Yeah.
They sell the database for 2,500 to electronic medical, to AI. So here's the thing. Now they're trying to get rid of you guys by now using by saying, hey, give us your database. And then they go into your database and start extracting all the stuff on your patients. And doctors, especially older doctors, are buying that. Think about how Amazon was created, right? Amazon was created by them taking the database of all these small little bookstores, right? And then next thing you know, they have this massive database of people that they could just reach out. Don't buy the book from the little bookstore or these mega book chains, right? It's the same principle, right? They buy these small bookstores and the bookstores gets tempted and sells their database. Database is very important. You've spent 10 to 20 years getting a relationship with a patient. You have over 10,000 patients. Those are your patients to protect. It's very important to protect their identity, to protect who they are, to protect their history, and not just give it for some, quasi research that, in my opinion, is not even well done. So if you're going to donate your body to research, make sure it's a good scientist that's using it for the good of mankind and not using it to sell it to some guy for $10 million, right?
I'm so glad you said that. When I worked at a clinic, every week we'd have someone come up to us trying to get their hands in the database. And there was this weird expectation that you just give your keys to the kingdom. And no.
That's the keys to the kingdom. You got to protect it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the microbiome space. We protected by a lot of blockers. Like there's no way, I put traps in my database so that if somebody even hacks into it and the patient says autism, he's not really autism. So you have to trap them because they're going to hack in. So you got to be smarter and you got to use codes.
So one of the questions from Dr. Abbott, Stephanie Abbott, she said audit trails are a requirement for EMR and eSource. Do we know if they're a requirement for EDC?
I'm not sure about that.
They are, and
sure
there's any time you remove something, just like in Creo, and somebody brought up the example of eSource earlier. There's an audit trail now.
No, actually, To that question, if you put any notes, you can't go back to the EDC. Mm-hmm. You have to date it. It dates it after the day you wrote it. So you can't go back.
Sorry, I just realized I'm the one who's responsible for clicking on these comments. I'm sorry, listeners. We'll get through all of these. Just please keep your conversation going. We'll go through some of these. If you see a question.
Yeah. There needs to be ethics. There needs to be righteousness. There needs to be protecting the patients, and there needs to be advocacy from the doctor. Mm-hmm. We are here to protect them.
Yep. And I like the sponsors direct from the monitors direct from sponsors.
Me too.
That's my favorite.
And by the way, here's the thing. I was doing back-to-back 2 trials for a pharmaceutical company, a big one, who will remain nameless. And they had one trial was actually on C. diff. The other one was on psoriasis. The psoriasis was a monitor that was from the CRO, and the C. diff was a monitor that was from the sponsor directly. Mm-hmm. Guess which one went to market? The one from the sponsor.
100%, because they have more skin in the game.
Yes, exactly. And the one from the CRO, so many problems. Too many cooks in the kitchen, I call that.
So going back, MDs are constantly tricked into, I wouldn't even say sharing their database, but giving up their database. The thing is, it's bad.
Yeah, and also I never give access to the monitors to my database. Never. They can look over my shoulder on the record when I open it. Never, ever give access. Because then with one click, they can download everything, and they just told you.
Have you ever had the ones that say, well, all the other sites do it?
I don't care. Just because everybody's jumping off the bridge doesn't mean I'm going to jump. Exactly. Even more reason for me not to do it. That's probably why I was the opposite the whole pandemic. I'm like, wait, we're not looking at hydroxychloroquine? Okay, I'm going to look at it. We're not looking at ivermectin? Okay, I'm going to look at it. So.
Do you believe that home nursing services are offered under DCT expose the identity or pass on the data to outside parties? Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah. There's actually some new FDA guidances.
I have a story that 2019, I was with Dr. Hazan at DIA before COVID. By the way, Dr. Hazan, can we get your audience on here? Like, if you want to retweet this while I set up the story. Real
Yeah,
quick?
I have to kind of like go get my.
Okay.
Let me.
Okay. So we were at DIA 2019. Everybody knows this was before DCT, virtual trials. Guys, it's like disappeared from history of clinical research, this concept of virtual trials. Like, is this Mandela effect? Were we in another universe where this didn't exist for some? It just existed for me? You guys remember this, right? Virtual trials? This was like DCT before DCT. LinkedIn wasn't as big, so no one really, maybe it didn't get like emphasized, but virtual trial 2019 DIA was all the rage. I went around every booth. I like to collect all the swag, give it to my employees when I get back. Like, just talk to people. There's multiple AI vendors before AI was cool, right? If you look on the back of their brochure, sponsored by big CRO, but like small print,
They
right?
want
They're
you.
backed, financially backed. I asked the guy came out, not the salesperson. I told the who's in charge. The guy finally came out. I said, "Hey, how do you do this?" Like, I pretended I'm gonna help him find sites, right? He said, "Well, you just go. We go to different doctors' offices, and we offer them the opportunity to do virtual trial, but we do feasibility in the right way. So rather than relying on what the sites tell us, we log into their EMRs, and then we can do our own studies, all right, in perpetuity. We go back and do retrospective trials. And if we like the database in a future trial, we know which site we can use." I said, "Okay, so what's the trial for the doctor?" "Oh, very easy. They just give us access. We come in, we'll connect it to our AI, and then that's it. In perpetuity, $5,000. $5,000.
Right.
All right, that's it. Like, that was the study. That was the model. That's disappeared. They realized it can't work for a lot of reasons. That's another show. But now it's DCT, and so it's at least like getting
We
closer
knew
to
that
like.
too, and we knew that wouldn't work.
No, and do you ever see that happening and then not just ask yourself, how is this okay? How is this even legal?
So
I mean,
many
who am
things
I
are
to
not
ask?
legal. So many things are not legal.
Mm-hmm.
But who are you to kind of, start a legal case about it? Look, they're retracting 500. They retracted 500 papers from the medical literature. How is that legal? Doctors are spending their time. They're writing the data. And then the data gets retracted 20 years later. I mean, come on. This is the biggest corruption ever. So if you don't fit the narrative, they don't like your narrative, they don't like your paper because it brings on another idea in science. Wow, look at that. Ideas in science. Because it's not one way, they're going to retract your papers. And they're coming up with all sorts of things. Don't retract, disprove it. That's what science is all about. You don't like the paper, expose the paper by saying, hey, this data was flawed and false, right? My hypothesis on ivermectin increasing the bifidobacteria was retracted. A hypothesis. Why? Because I quoted papers that said that ivermectin worked for COVID that were themselves retracted, right? So it didn't fit the narrative of ivermectin works for COVID, so they retracted it. And now my hypothesis is retracted. It's a hypothesis. I'm allowed to quote retracted papers. There's no book that tells you, oh, a hypothesis, you can't quote this, this, and that. No, there's no guidelines. So the fact that they retracted a hypothesis is waking up the world to the corruption of medicine and science.
Yeah, because it's almost like they're saying, yeah, you can't even guess about this. You can't even think that this might happen.
And you know what? I could have fought it, but I'm like, why fight it? This is the biggest clue to corruption in science. The paper, by the way, was one of the paper that had 99% more views than any other papers on Frontiers. It had like something like 44 or 47,000 views, people reading it, right? And that was retracted. So imagine a journal retracting papers that have the most views from authors that are being followed. I mean, that's like, hi, let me put a movie with, Brad Pitt, and which is the number one selling celebrity, and let me retract it. It's ridiculous. It made 100 million in the movie theaters, but we're just going to retract it just for the hell of it.
What parallels do you see between small site ownership, like you've been doing for decades,
So I think
and
we're going to go back to that.
you're gonna
Small,
go? We're gonna go back to small sites.
I think you're going to have to.
I hope so. That's our theory. That's
Yeah, I'm so um, Philadelphia just got a grant of like $7 million to look at the microbiome. And I just got the memo today about that. And I'm going, yeah, okay, good luck. Because, academia doesn't really, is not very efficient, right? It takes at least a year to get through the IRB, right? To go through academia. And then here's the thing, it's so big that you get lost in that shuffle. And can you trust the data? In other words, did you get a relationship with your patient to find out if your patient is an alcoholic? Because I can assure you, alcohol affects the microbiome, right? So we need to have that in the history, right? So here's the thing. Unless you have, why did I get involved to be the sponsor and to be the site and to be everything? Because I trust my research. I trust my quality supervision. I want to see it with my own eyes. Why did I step into COVID and you and Chris monitored me treating all these patients? I paid for this. You spent your time for free paying for that, right? So why did I do that? Because I wanted to see the data with my eyes, I wanted to see if treatment worked. I didn't want to see the placebo-controlled trial that they can manipulate. I wanted to see if treatment worked. The fact that no one, and Dan and Chris, you guys saw my charts, no one died on those trials. No one. Because what happened was, if they crashed, I was giving them the full treatment and I saw it working. When you see people with oxygens of like 88% going back to normal. In fact, yesterday's case, I was surprised. We're still having desaturations, but not as bad. It was like 91%. But I've had as low as 63% and 72% and 73% treated at home that survived. The first case of the pandemic in March was a COPD, CHF, cardiac bypass prior, diabetic, overweight. And I was so scared of using hydroxychloroquine because they made us scared of it. I told the patient to lick the capsule, okay? And then I gave him a whole bunch of other drugs, Z-Pak, etc., and vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, and he survived. That was at the beginning, right? And to me, when I saw that, I said, wait a minute, if this guy survives, then I'm going to be fine, right? So then I was not afraid anymore. I took off my mask and I started seeing patients. You saw me, Dan. I wasn't wearing a mask.
No, I know.
The mask with your podcast at some point, right?
Well, I'm trying to draw parallels because, like, there's an orthodoxy, right? There's an established orthodoxy in science. I don't know how it became that way. Trust the experts, right? And at the site level, we have a similar thing. I mean, myself, Brad, Fox are always fighting with people on LinkedIn. Oh, why did you name it Save Our Sites? We don't need sites to be saved. Really? It might be easy if you're VC backed, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not so easy for the rest of us when we're me and my wife's saving account backed.
Right.
All right. That's
and
savings
during
account.
the pandemic, we took a huge hit. People have no idea. Like, I have all these sponsors asking for all these things. I'm like, you don't realize I had to cut down my staff in order to keep working, right? You have to kind of balance these numbers because otherwise you go way down. And remember, we're supposed to hold these charts for 25 years. Who's paying for that storage?
Mm-hmm.
You are.
Have you? I remember when we monitored, you got into the e-consent quick. You were trying to do all the everything you could. what are your takeaways now, 3 years later, for your site? Are you guys eSource, or like, what are your thoughts on all this tech now?
I
Honestly,
actually went back to paper charts.
what's the reason?
Protection of the data.
I see.
Protection of the data. It's too much out there. When my patients get called for, they get like emails, or they get, advertisement on cholesterol, and they have high cholesterol. Somebody got the data, right? And the patient only comes to my office and trusted me, especially, I have a Malibu clientele. They're celebrities. Everybody wants to get into my charts to know like who's who and who's getting what, right? So my staff is very, very protective of that data, because we don't want to talk about it. So, but yeah, the sites we have to protect them. There is an SOS. First of all, like I said, if the sponsor doesn't like the fact that the data didn't come out the way he wanted, you may not get paid. And you may not get paid because the CRO got paid and then the CRO doesn't pay you. Or, I've had over the years, I can tell you there's been a couple of monitors that have like really stood up for me, where the sponsor owed me like close to $100,000 of clinical trials, of doing colonoscopies, blood work, monitor, paying the coordinators. Because even when the monitors come into your site for 2 to 3 days, that's costly for you, because you have to cut down your clinic to accommodate that space for the patients, right? So when you don't get paid $100,000 that pays all your overhead, you're basically you're going under very fast. And so one monitor, I remember, he's like, no, absolutely not. Dr. Hazan needs to be paid. She's done a whole lot of work. Listen, I still have a company that I did a vaccine trial for that took 7 years of my life, and they've yet to pay me a penny.
Oh
7
my
years
gosh.
of my life.
So that CRO, the monitor that was standing up for you, was that a CRO hired monitor or a
No,
sponsor?
that was a sponsor
Yeah.
hired
Yeah.
monitor.
Another, so they're very,
Yes.
very dedicated to the quality.
Yeah.
And this is starting to bring a lot of ideas where it almost makes me think like these local private sites are the ones that need to be saved, because they're not the ones that are necessarily funded by certain biased entities.
And by the way, as a sponsor, I prefer the small sites, and I make sure that I prefer the small CROs like Dan and Chris, because I know they want to see the data. Dan was like, part of our trials. I mean, it's like he basically saw the data firsthand. They monitored meticulously, in the sense that they were they're righteous. That's what I like. They're not tainted by money. So that's important. Because believe me, I'm sure a lot of people would have come to Dan and Chris and said, hey, we'll pay you $1 million to get into to stop Dr. Hazan. But they didn't. They're still there. They were still monitoring. So that's important.
And
Righteousness is important.
Chris took the quick mill though. Chris took it and bought the Corvette.
You're funny, Dan.
no, in all sincerity, there are sites. I've got over 60 sites across the network now. Every site has the same story, and it's just what you were saying. They are not being paid, and there's a lot of wool being covered over their eyes. There's a reason why 34% of a site's finances, of a site's budget in a contract, is manually invoiced, and there's a reason why almost half of that, if not more, is always left on the table, because they make it really hard for sites to request the money that was promised to them.
And Brad says it all the time. Like, sites, there's way better ways to make money and make a living than owning a site. We all know that on this panel.
It's like, and it's tempting, right? Because like you see these beautiful budgets and you're like, oh yeah, it's amazing, right? But then you don't get paid, so it doesn't matter that there was an amazing budget. Here's a clue. If the CRO is outsourced to the Philippines for their bookkeeping, stay away, because it's going to take you 10 people in the accounting site to basically monitor. Remember, these people in the Philippines are $7 a day. Okay. They want to know every little box. They want you to itemize every little box, or they will not pay you for the invoice. And the invoice has to be a certain.
Spot on. We cannot in this country compete with the staffing models of these global CROs to claim our money.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's terrible. Trying to work ex-US, waking up at 6 a.m. 2 months later to see someone addressing a ticket that you sent 2 months ago and still not getting paid. It happens a lot.
Well, that's when you hold the case books. You wait till you get paid.
Mm-hmm.
You don't rush to sign. You don't rush because you have to do due diligence first to make sure that all those charts are, what is in the EDC.
So I have a couple questions.
By the way, that's a taboo topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
I remember being at meetings and I was talking about budget, and all the PIs were like, "Shh, don't talk about budget.
Yep.
Don't talk." It's like,
it's the fear. It's mongering. It's fear mongering.
Yeah. Why not talk about budget?
Yeah.
Why not talk about the fact? Why not expose the fact that these sponsors or CROs are not paying the PIs? Why not? It should absolutely be talked about.
I think there's a very weird dynamic where it seems like sites are the only stakeholder that for some reason aren't expected to profit. Where look at the CRO, but the IQVIA CEO made $30 million last year, and I can't get a $25,000 check.
Well, and by the way, that's the same thing that goes on with these lobbyist narrative on doctors. Those doctors are making so much money. Really? Let's look at how much money pharma is making. Okay, let's look at how much money the CROs are making, and then we're talking about doctors. The poor doctor who can barely pay his secretary to stay in business at $50 a visit from the patient. And why should the doctors be making the money? They've done all the schooling. Look at all these degrees. They didn't just come up, and they invested in their education. So, yeah, it's ridiculous. Ridiculous.
So do you think all this money that is being earned by CROs and such are a result of inefficiencies?
Yeah, probably. And also look at who they hire for monitors, right? I mean, I've had monitors that were like econ majors. I mean, why am I explaining C. diff to a monitor that has an econ major? I have to start back to like bacteria is anaerobic, and I have to explain what anaerobic is, right? At least put me a monitor that has a biology degree, that would be the first thing. So yeah, there are a lot of inefficiencies, and they don't understand. So basically, they don't understand. I mean, I've seen so many monitors over the years that it's been a joke. So some are very good, but some are it was just too much.
I actually think one of the places we're headed as an industry, it's just my theory. I mean, it's kind of where I see things headed is save our sites, save our sponsors running in parallel. Because I think, especially at the long tail of the sponsors, like you're a perfect example. You're very long tail. Like you're on the end of this just long tail of like sponsors. They don't necessarily have the money to do all this stuff. They don't have money to waste. And there's all these grifters in between with their hands out. Pay me for this, pay me for that, pay me. We make money regardless. I think both of these stakeholders, the sponsors who pay for the stuff, and the sites who see the patients. I mean, there's no research without the patients. They have mutual interest, right? I think they're like the next decade is going to be very interesting, especially with tech. I think tech's actually facilitating this common ground between sites and sponsors. My opinion.
Yeah, I think I think there's also a movement for doctors that are going to start becoming more independent, and the innovators especially, to not sell their ideas so quickly. You think of these doctors that are basically selling their ideas to pharma, and they basically get $1 million for their idea and their patent, And then next thing you know, pharma's making billions of dollars on that idea. I think doctors that are innovating are going to be a little bit smarter at the way that they're going to do the research. They're going to collaborate more. And I think that's what we need to start seeing is a collaboration of physicians uniting together for the sake of research and for the sake of good research and for the sake of patients.
Maybe that's the real decentralized trials. Maybe
That
that's-
is. Because essentially you come to a relationship with the physicians and say, look, I want to see if this drug is working because I saw it in a couple patients. I mean, look what we did, Dan and Chris, with hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pak, vitamin C, D, and zinc, right? In a way, we created a little bit of a healthcare revolution. The trial wasn't finished because it was so costly, but we posted it in full transparency for the whole world to see. And doctors started getting ideas on how to treat patients, and they saw there was a network of doctors. You think about the FLCC, you think of Peter Bacala, you think of all these doctors, they kind of started following. All I had to do was post it on clinicaltrials.gov. And then the next protocol was ivermectin, doxycycline, zinc. Same thing. It got attacked because it's not owned by venture capitalists. It was the idea, the innovation from physicians on the front line. And then what did it do? We saw the data. It created a healthcare revolution. It was an eye opener, right? You got to see the data yourself, right? Too often we have these protocols, we don't even know what they're named, ABCD, drug, and then they come to us, placebo control. We don't know whether the patient's having the real stuff. So we don't really know how the patients are doing with that drug, right? And then all of a sudden in clinical trials, after 4 phases, you hear, oh, the drug worked and you were part of it, right? But then when the drug hits the market and the physicians are using it, it doesn't work. That's when you really see. So what we did with hydroxy and ivermectin is actually we made the doctors see without the whole loophole of a placebo-controlled trial. And it was a cheap solution that saved millions of people. And the fact that I lost no one on the pandemic speaks for itself. Treatment works when you're courageous enough as a physician to do the right thing.
Yeah. I mean, that speaks to the ease of the IE criteria, right? The reason a lot of these drugs post-marketing, FDA says, wait a minute, let's go do another study or let's put a black box warning on this because where are all these AEs coming from? Well, it's because the study you designed in phase 2 and 3 was so pristine. You have to have like a comic book character to qualify. It's not real people with these conditions.
True.
So that's one of the other issues we got to be discussing at SOS and save our sponsors. I understand exploratory endpoints. I mean, you as a sponsor, right? You did exploratory endpoints too, but never at the cost of the primary objective. And a lot of these sponsors are getting carried away, and I think it's VCs, investors. I mean, it gets
it's the money. The money is the problem, and not the righteousness. I think sites need to be. Think about it. I'm blacklisted from a bunch of pharmaceutical companies because I'm the girl that basically will report an SAE. I'm too involved. That's what I've been called. PI is too involved.
Wait, who told you this? Without names, but like a sponsor or what? Who told you?
I know someone that was working at the sponsor, that was working for the sponsor, kind of like, was telling me, well, you're blacklisted because the reality is you're too involved, Dr. Hazan.
You know what, Dr. Hazan? You have too much PI oversight. Could you just tone it up a notch for me?
That's basically what they're saying. They're saying, could you look the other way on that SAE, please? Mm-hmm. No, I'm not going to look the other way because I sleep at night.
So you're the PI when they tell you, hey, our medical monitor, the team thinks this should not be classified SAE. Can you change it? You would say what?
Over my dead body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's not going to happen.
It's my license on the line, not yours.
Forget the license. It's my conscience. It's my soul. I have to sleep at night. I'm not joking. And by the way, let me tell you, when we talk about the microbiome, if you live if you live a life of being righteous and you go on the right path and you do the right thing, everything is balanced in there. If you're deviating, your mind starts going like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Then you're always catching up and cleaning up the mess that you've done from the beginning. And that ruins your microbiome.
So stress is bad for the microbiome.
Well, stress and also not being righteous, you know, if you want to have chronic diseases and not sleep, then you do shady things like, you know, hiding some serious adverse event that could hurt another person. So you cannot do that. You have to be righteous. And I've had sites, I've had sponsors and CROs tell me, you know, can you remove that? It wasn't a side effect. Who are you to tell me it wasn't a side effect? How are you so sure it wasn't a side effect? You know what I mean? So, but here's the other thing, right? About being a righteous site. Okay. How do you know the patient? I've had patients, and you know, Dan and Chris, I've had patients that came to my office who are what I like to call site shoppers, you know, and they go to different sites and they're enrolled in the protocol in San Diego and they want to enroll themselves in my protocol. How many PIs do you think go through the trouble of making sure that that patient is not enrolled in another site? How many PIs do you think are actually private investigators, you know, to investigate to see if the patient is, or that the patient is psoriasis, right? Do you know how many patients I had a study that I think was paying like about $5,000 for patients with psoriasis. People would come to me and say, look, I have psoriasis here. Look at it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't see any psoriasis. Where's your medical records? And they would bully me and be aggressive because they were seeing the money, right? But I still didn't take them. How many sites would be like, well, the patient says he has psoriasis. I'm going to document psoriasis and I'm going to pay the patient $5,000 and I'm going to get my whatever, $15,000 for running the study on the patient, right? So that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how many site owners are actually righteous enough to do the right thing and put the right patients. And I bet you that the number one reason why these trials do not work is because the patients are not stratified properly.
I am so
consolidate.
Yeah.
As sites consolidate and become like networks, do you think righteousness scales?
No.
She doesn't even need to have to answer that.
Because here's the thing: the sites that consolidate and do that are consolidating for a reason. They're being successful. They're making a bunch of money. So I have said this forever. Calling it patient enrollment and making some kind of a metric based off of performance like that is unethical. We as sites perform services just like healthcare. This isn't like an RVU thing. It's like we take care of these people, and they're part of the trial for a reason, and it's not because of our pocketbooks.
I'll tell you, my sister's been at this longer than all of us, and you know, she is a bulldozer when it comes to that, like righteous to the max. Like she will, like her records, and she's been attacked by you know, she's had the FDA in her office. She's had all sorts of stuff because she's that efficient, right? But here's the thing: when you are righteous, good drugs come out, right? She put ivermectin to the market for scabies and lice. She put Harvoni to the market for hepatitis C, right? She brought in like thousands of patients. So here's the thing: at the end of the day, if you are righteous and you are doing the right thing and the drug is the right drug, it's going to change a disease. But we have to do the right thing.
Brad was going to say something, but
go ahead, Brad. Go ahead.
Brad always says we scale the unscalable at sites.
I mean, essentially, yeah. I mean, and you know, to your point, I mean, it's easier to do business with the business owner who's there, who gives a shit, versus an employee who may be working for another site network in 3 months, right? I mean, that's pretty apparent to all of us. But I'm more interested in the idea of, and I guess you've pretty much hit all this, but you know, how is this whole DCT movement just going to make things more messy? And do PIs want this? As someone who's a, you know, physician and investigator, like, is it a net positive to implement and take things further away from your oversight? Do you feel that's a good move? Obviously, there's a big push for that right now. We can get more patients in, but there's the quality going to suffer. And to your point, you want to see, you want your eyes on these patients. You want to be there caring for them. I mean, is this going to create even worse problems going forward?
I had a sponsor one time, a monitor actually from a CRO, tell me, well, Dr. Hazan, you're not enrolling as many. This was a very difficult study to enroll. And he said, well, you're not enrolling as much as you were going to say you were going to enroll, right? And there was a beautiful budget on that to enroll. And I said, well, listen, these patients, it's very difficult to meet every one of your inclusion exclusion criteria. Yes, I could have put it on a blinders. Anyway, so he basically said, well, you lost out on this budget. And I said, listen, at the end of the day, let's be honest, your drug didn't cut it. And that's it. The drug didn't cut it. It didn't show the good results. So thank God I didn't enroll. I would have wasted my time. So that's it.
So do you think that being righteous in the long run is being efficient as well?
Yeah, I think being righteous, first of all, money comes to those who do things right. Okay, money comes to those who do things wrong too, but money comes to those eventually, if you do the right thing, more than money comes to those who do what's right, right? Health. Look at it. Look at me. I stood on the during the whole pandemic without a mask, exposed to thousands of patients, traveled. In fact, I'm writing my case, traveled the whole, world. I went to Malaysia. I went to Zimbabwe. I went all over the place and stood in airplanes for 33 hours without a mask in the peak of COVID. I went to New Orleans in the peak of Delta. I went to Orlando in the peak of Delta without a mask. Okay, so I'm exposed. I survived that. Why? Because I did everything during the pandemic that was right, which was saving lives. I put my money into my research. God paid me back by saving me and my family. I lost no one, and my patients. I lost no one. So more than money, health is everything. Peace of mind is everything. And you have to have faith for that. To me, it wasn't about fear. It was about faith. And I answer to a higher world. That's part of being righteous, not to answer to other humans, but to answer to divine power that actually is watching your actions. We are all tested here, so we need to do what's right. And yes, we need to advocate for higher ethics and standards. 100%.
Do you think do you think ethics and VC can coexist?
I think VCs, there's a lot of VCs that are coming to me for fecal transplant right now because they have some major problems. And fecal transplant is not approved unless you have C. diff. And we're far from precision medicine because they want to make a product out of feces. So, at some point, disease has a way of humbling people. That's what I say. So, VCs eventually will have to be humble and actually do the right thing in investing.
Do you think the IRBs are doing? You've worked with IRBs on both sides, site level, sponsor level. Sponsor level came later. Has your opinion of IRBs changed?
I like small IRBs. I don't like IRBs controlled by venture capitalists. And I've discovered that recently, that if they are owned by venture capitalists, somebody's dictating what they're doing.
Have you ever read a protocol where you said to yourself, how in the world could this get by an IRB?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yes.
Yeah. So Heather asked, out of curiosity,
do you remember there was a protocol? Did anybody ever look at that? But I remember seeing it. The patients were paid $12,000 to ingest E. coli. Did you ever see this protocol? I saw an ad somewhere.
What?
Yes. And to me, the whole time I was like, who paid for that? Who approved this? You know, I mean, that's like some. So here's a patient that's coming, wants the $12,000, but has no idea what it's doing to his body, right? That to me was just, how did that get approved, right? Talk about an overload of microbes and messing up your microbiome.
Did you see the one? It was a giant sample collection study where they wanted to collect over a liter of blood over the course of like 3 hours.
Oh my
Wow.
God.
And they said, and the answer was, how did this get approved? And they said, well, you can give them some orange juice. That was their,
Yes.
that was approved by an IRB.
Didn't you know orange juice replenishes the blood very fast?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But that makes it okay.
Yes,
So they can have a giant biobank.
of course.
So,
And by the way, that's the same thing with like these they're doing like they're doing stool collection, blood collection, you know, and sites are getting paid nothing for this. Again, you're giving the key to the kingdom of humanity. To who? What are they using it for? That's my biggest question.
Right. I got offered
Are they going to
once.
control?
I got offered by this small biotech once, $1,500 a patient. It doesn't matter what they have, any disease that you just need their medical record, like a diagnosis or no diagnosis, and a stool sample.
Right.
And I was like, well, what's the benefit to the patient? Do they get an analysis of their record, or like why would I tell my patient to do this? Like, just give me your stool sample, or is that it? They were even trying to say there's like a mini consent, like not a full consent, like not an authorization to release records, just like a consent of like, we're collecting your stool sample. And I said, no, like, who's gonna do this kind of study? Apparently there was CRO out there willing to do that, and there was an IRB out there willing to oversee this study, which to me
And
was
there's
interesting.
also piracy, right? So pirates that are still buying the data behind you, right? Think about 23andMe. You did that little swab of your mouth, you sent it in, you thought it was just to learn about your origins and where you came
I did.
from.
I personally did.
And guess what? You didn't consent to your data being sold to GSK, did you, Dan? I didn't. In fact, I didn't even sign the consent for that test. My husband signed it for me. So is that even legit? Did I authorize? You know, so it was not a proper informed consent wasn't done, and they used my data for whatever nefarious things that they did with it. Here's the thing: you don't know who owns the data. Data is important. Data empowers a human being. The computer is data. It empowered Bill Gates. He got us all hooked up on all these programs, and he got data. He got our attention. He got that. Now, are we going to give him also our DNA and our microbiome? No, you got to pay attention to who is taking the data at the end of the day, and who is the venture capitalist that owns the pharmaceutical company and the CRO and the RB. We all have to do our part.
Well, at the end of the day, like, all roads lead to big pharma. I mean, the biotechs get acquired, get licensing deals. It's kind of unavoidable, right? So what do you think is the future of research? I mean, we're entering like a promising next few decades as far as like innovations and hopefully sites. Like, we need a bigger infrastructure. I think we don't need a more consolidated infrastructure. We need a more robust and diverse infrastructure. That's why we want diversity in our trials. But how do you think this ends, like, or plays out over the next decade? I think
it's very important not to blacklist sites. That's the first thing. And if I were involved in politics or in the regulatory of all this, is I would make sure that every site has a chance to be doing the research. If somebody wants to undertake a trial, listen, I wanted to do the clinical trials on the vaccines. I wasn't allowed. My sister wanted to do it. She's independent. She wasn't allowed. So, because I wanted to see myself, the serious adverse events, etc., because I know I trust myself. So, and by the way, the FDA, as much as like the FDA has had, you know, there's some people in the FDA that are nefarious. And unfortunately, those are the people that are leading and put themselves in these positions. But a lot of the agents at the FDA level are very righteous. They're doing the right thing, you know, and, you know, FDA agents know I mean, how many times have I seen, an agent, and they know we have gray hair for a reason, we've been at this a while, so they are going to trust our data. And I'll tell you also, physicians, when they know I'm on a clinical trial, they'll call me. I was doing the fecal material capsule in a clinical trial, and after the data was written, my colleagues came to me and asked me, how is that real? Is that what you saw? After the fact, of course, and everything was published, and I could say it, yes. And my colleagues trust me. There was a reason why there was such a push of, again, this healthcare revolution of hydroxy and ivermectin. There's certain people, trust is going to be one of the things in the future that's going to be very hard to get. I can tell you, after COVID now, someone told me, well, why didn't you fall into the narrative and follow the narrative of the vaccines? And I said, because frankly, there's very few pharmaceutical companies that I trust. And I like to do due diligence myself and see the data. When I saw that the vaccines affect the bifidobacteria, that was a huge, in a couple patients at the beginning, that was a huge red flag. That was like, what the hell's going on? Here everybody's lining up for these vaccines, and I'm seeing that it's affecting the bifidobacteria. And now we're seeing increased cancer from these vaccines, increased coagulopathies. Is that, due diligence needed to be, somebody needed to take the lead on this, to see a different narrative, to contradict. We need to be able to contradict the narrative, to contradict the science. Otherwise, it's not science.
Well, yeah, the motto was trust the experts, and in research, at the small site level, the motto is also trust the experts. Like we're going down this path of DCT. This is where we're gonna go. The problem is, the reason why these things don't work, and the reason why sites are still here, and more important than ever, is what you said about trust. Patients trust. Go figure, right? They trust their clinicians and not big pharma. Like, I know that's hard concept
Because
to grasp.
they developed a relationship. When you save a life, that patient knows you woke up at 2:00 in the morning. Like last night, I wanted to delay this because I woke up at 4:00 in the morning from that patient with COVID, which is shocking to me that we still have COVID. But, this was a hard case. Here's, so that's that trust, right? That doctor was there. It was more than money, because I didn't get paid at 4:00 in the morning for waking up and giving advice, So that's when you basically, it's beyond money. It's really, I do a good thing and then the patient has my back. And, my patients had my back the whole pandemic. You see them on Twitter. There's a reason I have so many followers. All these patients they have a chip on their shoulder themselves because they saw treatment worked. So they're the ones that are like, wait a minute, I survived. I was not vaccinated. I survived. And I had COVID and it was no problem. 92-year-old patients, 97-year-old patients still alive, talking about it. These people would have been dead.
That brings back a memory of mine. So one thing that I've always called it is money is literally just a bunch of metal and paper. And we are the ones that put the value in it. But is it really us that put the value in it, or is it the people who tell us that the money is valuable? So then that's where it gets a little deep. Well, we can leave it at that. But we are on the top of the hour. I did have one comment that I wanted to share with you because I've run into this. I don't know how many times you've gotten a letter from the sponsor saying, hey, we're going to start commercializing residual samples from our trials. So can you just go ahead and sign this paper and release it? And I don't know how many times I've fought back and I said, our patients never signed this consent.
That's
and
right.
They didn't agree to this. And if you were to commercialize that right now, they would lose their ability to withdraw consent and destroy their samples. And every time, you know what those sponsors tell me? We never thought about it like that.
Please.
That was their thought. And so now when you go into the world of tokenization, which by the way is going to have ethical implications later on, you're
Right.
going to see that patients will lose their ability to withdraw consent on the commercialization of these samples through tokenization.
They're making it really difficult for patients to protect their data. So you have to really be, careful if you want to participate in a trial.
Yeah.
And that's going to make recruitment very difficult in the future, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And their solution?
The public is awake now. The public is awake. You see them. I mean, you see them, supporting RFK because he's all about safety and pharma. You see them. The public is awake.
Are you guys seeing post-COVID more, like, is it easier to convince patients to do a trial or having to fight a little harder to get the patient's trust?
Well, I mean, the patients that want the money, they'll always come.
Right? Yeah, take them out. But like regular patients,
well, those are like your number one shoppers, the ones that want to make the money. Take them out and bring in the real, like, for example, I have a celiac study right now. And we've had difficulty recruiting because of COVID. But now, the patients that are coming to see me are trusting me because I was there for them during COVID. So they will enroll in the study. And that's what we're seeing. I think it's about the patients trusting the doctors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The doctors. I think that's the key thing. The doctor
is doing the right thing. And also having a legal system for the patient that, if the doctor is not doing the right thing and selling your data without your authorization, then
the accountability. Yeah,
the accountability. We have a legal system for that, right? Right. And we have an IRB, regardless of whether the IRB is bought by venture capitalists, by venture capitalists, regardless, that IRB is responsible. So for your answer of, hey, don't destroy the residual, I would go back to the IRB. And at all times, you can go to the FDA and present that. And I would encourage physicians to have that relationship with the FDA and report things. That's the number one, because as much as we think the FDA is whatever, the FDA is there to protect you as a site, and you have to report it. So, they may be annoyed with you or whatever, but it doesn't matter. You have to do due diligence and report it. That's PI oversight is number one.
Wow. And getting back to the trust.
And say, didn't you tell us that you want PI oversight? The number one way that a drug goes to market is if there's PI oversight. And PI oversight is not just signing a chart that a coordinator told you to sign. It's actually demonstrating that you were involved, that you know the patients. When the FDA came to my office for multiple audits, I knew my patients. I knew everything. So that's it.
Just to end on this note, so the trust factor, right? I do feel that this is one of the reasons why we need more clinicians doing research. I feel like it's easier for the patients to trust their own clinician than a stranger on the internet telling them to do a study. Once they're in, though, this is the beautiful thing about clinical trials, and one of the things that's just kept me in. The patients generally, whether placebo or not, have a good experience with the trial. They're impressed. All the labs they get, they're like, I never get like my cortisol checked. You guys do it every week. I never get this many level of ECG. I didn't know this about me. I'm taking this to my cardiologist. And that's more like speaks volumes to like how poor our healthcare system is. Like, why are these things not covered? We know why they're not covered, but that's one of the beautiful things about clinical research that I think get lost in all this chaos with distrust and big pharma and using your data and all this stuff.
I agree.
There's so much good in this industry too.
Yes, and I've saved a lot of people over the years, and there's been some great products over the years. Unfortunately, there's good and bad. Everything. It's the balance of the world. So there's good and bad pharma. There's good and bad FDA. There's good and bad IRB. There's good and bad, everything.
Well, there's good and bad sites.
There's good and bad sites that are not doing due diligence. But I think at the end of the day, we really have to bring it back again to, if you do the right thing, good things happen. Good things happen to good people. That's it. So
Dr. Hazan, this is the first time I've met you through the virtual aspect, but it sounds like you're coming to SOS, and I would love to sit down and have a conversation with you if you have time. I'm stoked after hearing your story. I have so many questions, and I'd really like to know more.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I
I
have a
knew
lot of
you guys would hit it off. Anyone who comes in touch with Dr. Hazan hits it off. I know you've had some enemies on Twitter. You even had a few on LinkedIn. I saw your early arguments on LinkedIn. But you know what? You are always keeping it real, and that's one of the things that I think more people need to do in this industry. It's like enough of the cliche, everything's fine, kumbaya. It's not that way.
It's not fine, and we need more transparency. That's it. More transparency, and we shouldn't be afraid to speak. Freedom of speech, right? So, and if you see something wrong, you have to speak up. You can't get scared of speaking up.
Freedom of speech is, I mean, I already know this is not going to go on my YouTube. That's a testament to where we are in our society today. Like, I can't put this on YouTube. I've been warned by my overlords twice. One more time, it's over. I can't risk it. But it's LinkedIn and Twitter. Thank God. They haven't policed it. They haven't policed LinkedIn and Twitter, so or podcast for that matter.
We'll get it. We'll get it seen on.
And you'll retweet this to all your fans. Oh my gosh, Dr. Hazan on Twitter is amazing. So do you want people to follow you on Twitter underneath here or LinkedIn?
Twitter is fine. Yeah,
Twitter. That's where where the gloves come on.
That's why I did clinical trials. That's why I do clinical trials. Participating in a clinical trial with the right, pharmaceutical companies supporting, etc., is a great advantage to the patients. They get their colonoscopies for free. How many patients have I had that couldn't afford a colonoscopy, and I just put them in a trial, and the colonoscopy was paid for by the sponsor to see if they could qualify. So it is important, and it's important. And for the patient, I think, listen, making sure you have the consent, you read the consent, you ask the questions, you get a copy of the consent, and you know who to go back, to the IRB if there's a problem, So.
Yep. And by the way, that whole thing about tokenization and commercialization, the sponsor solution was to bake that into consent to show that the patients agreed to it.
So from the
be
beginning.
very, very careful when you sign a consent, because the things you're promising and the data that you are giving up could be very tricky.
It's greed. I think it stems to greed.
That one thing that was supposed to protect patient rights is now binding them to something that they can't control.
Once we go beyond like the primary objective and start doing all this exploratory stuff, well, maybe like in 10 years we can find something with your genotype. Well, yeah, but the patient, stop being greedy. Just get the first primary objective done. Like, it's hard enough to do that. Why do all these other things? Make life miserable for the patient, give them more burden.
Well, we can't start research without IRB approval. Somebody else.
Exactly.
That's
Kudos.
not.
You'd be surprised how many times sites have to. Well, and this is a whole. We could go another hour on this.
We got 3 hours with days on these things.
So
SOS. Yeah. No, it's definitely an SOS.
Yeah, SOS, February 2nd, Tucson, Arizona. If you have not yet registered, www.saveoursites.com. Dr. Hazan is going to be there, and I'm going to be there. Dan's going to be there. Brad, if you are in this industry and you care about our sites and our patient safety, you're going to come to SOS. It's going to happen. And a big shout out to Real-Time CTMS, to Creo, and to a lot of mystery sponsors that I promised I wouldn't announce yet. They're coming. But if you've been to the conferences, if you know this industry, you're going to know them. I guess I need to tell you, that's how legitimate this is. This is not just a taco truck and 20 people who want to talk about things. We are a legitimate conference now.
We've done that too, though. Dr. Hazan came to my meet at taco truck.
We'll have our taco truck.
No, listen, man. Part of the reason that I went into the public, and I think I have a following on Twitter, is because we need to educate the patients. We need to have transparency. And I think pharma needs to follow that. The people are speaking now. So if pharma wants to sell the products, they need to gain the trust of the physicians again.
Do me a favor.
My trust is lost, and they need to get back that trust that I can
advocacy.
I know.
Patient.
Yes.
Safety is like basic. We should all not even be told to do this. It's crazy that we have to tell people to do this.
Yes.
But fighting for patient, no, this is sponsored. This is an unnecessary burden. We will not have our patient go through this. Instead of just saying, okay, we do what you say because you're the sponsor. No, here's why. You tell me why this
How it
doesn't
works.
work. I'm doing that right now with a study. It's annoying, but it's something you have to
So
do.
I just had an idea, and we'll close on this. Dan, so if any of you have listened this far, then this is going to be perfect for you. We'll talk with the SOS committee, but we are still developing the agenda for the Save Our Sites conference. Dr. Hazan, I'll talk to the team, but ask your followers would you be interested in speaking at SOS?
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah.
Okay. Let's get it, because we
Actually,
want the SOS community needs to vote on that. We're gonna have surveys out, but if you want Dr.
Look at the comments here, man. They
Hazan.
said she's so sweet and real. She is bold. I
Heck
agree
yeah.
with her words.
So
And this is not
let
even
us
her
know.
fans. Her fans, she hasn't retweeted. So wait till
Yeah,
they
I
come on and watch the
Yeah.
replay. These are just
That's what
our.
I'm
This
saying.
is just our network.
Tell the SOS committee that you want Dr. Hazan to be a speaker at the SOS conference, and we'll be sure that we can get her on the agenda. But you need to let us know.
Thank you, Dr.
Perfect.
Hazan.
And I'll
thank you,
do it
Dr.
for
Fox.
free too. So
Oh, Dr.
No.
Hazan.
nothing.
Oh,
Because I'm already
Oh.
coming to the conference. So
that's
Might as well.
wonderful.
well,
Yes.
listen, you need advocacy, you need support, you're doing the right thing. And people that are doing the right thing, I'm always supporting. So I'm always supportive of people doing the right thing, especially physicians doing the right thing. I noticed, by the way, Dan, one of my physicians that was on the front line, you suggested possibly that she could join and do clinical trials. She wanted nothing to do with it because her
I know.
trust in pharma is so gone. And this is the problem right now. There's a lot of doctors, the silent majority, I call them, the silent majority. You've heard of like the ones that are out there. They have a lot of followers. They're speaking. They're bold. But there's a silent majority of physicians that are basically not speaking and that are following, our trend, etc. They don't trust. We need to bring trust back. And let me tell you, that silent majority is looking for other ways to fix their patients other than pharma.
Those are who we're targeting. Myself and Chris with SOS, Dr. Fox with CRPN, Brad with Hightower Clinical. And you know what? On the flip side of that coin, we'll end with this. The ones that are fighting you, the ones that are pushing the orthodoxy, you talk to them about treating, okay, you do a study. Since you know so much, do a study. Oh, well, I don't see patients. That's the problem.
That's another great point. Dr. Burks, on LinkedIn or Twitter, whatever, she was posting and said, no, she wrote some articles. She works for a pharma company right now, okay? And she writes, well, if you're not using Paxlovid, you're not doing anything right, and essentially your patient's going to end up in the hospital. She has not treated one patient.
I know. And that's the same people. The same people saying DCT will work. Just do research on a bus. Let's go do this and that. Everything except make life easier for the sites already doing studies.
And all of these decisions are made by people who don't know what they're doing. They don't know the policy.
Here's another one.
Yeah.
Peter Hotez, okay? Peter Hotez's daughter is autistic. He is categorical that the vaccines are not causing autism, that autism is not a gut problem, right? Categorical. Well, guess what? He hasn't fixed his own daughter. How are you an expert in autism if you haven't reached a cure in your own child? You're not an expert. The expert is the person that actually has reached a cure, right? An expert is someone that's sailing in the deep sea. It's not somebody that's reading a book on how to sail the ocean. I've said that, and I still say that.
This ain't never making
all these people that are I'm tired of these people that are giving advice and have yet to treat patients. They've not even been exposed to COVID. They've worn a mask the whole pandemic. Don't ask the person that wore a mask and stayed home how to survive the pandemic. Ask the person that was on the front line, not wearing a mask, traveling around the world. How did they survive the pandemic? Follow success. That's it. Don't follow failure.
I think the theme is they being the people controlling the money tend to push orthodoxy, right? The ones they get on board are other academics. The ones they actually need are people disconnected from this orthodoxy. Some
Right.
believe it, some don't. Who cares? They're treating patients. If the patients trust them, that's okay. That's their patient. There's a huge disconnect, and all the agendas are being used without considering the long tail, all the silent majority, like you said. And it's just a few people, Ivory Tower, VC funded, all this stuff. Like, this is the agendas we push, and this is why things don't work out. It works on paper, doesn't work in the wild.
Right. Well, we all know what happened to Marie Antoinette when she stood up and said, "Let them eat cake." So those people on their
Man.
Soviet power are going to fall down.
Hazen
eventually.
is Dark Phoenix.
You know it.
Well, thank
So-
you very much, Dr. Hazen. Everybody go connect with her
Pleasure.
on her Twitter. Dr. Fox has been a great host. Brad, I'm just glad I got to connect you and Brad to Dr. Hazen.
Oh man,
Yeah, text
I-
you
yeah.
connected by cell phone.
let's connect. Yeah, it's very nice to meet you.
Same
I can't
here.
wait to have more discussions. All right, everyone, we're gonna head out for the day, but thank you very much for joining in. Thanks for tuning in. www.saveoursites.com, Tucson, Arizona, February 2nd. But we do have monthly roundtables, so monthly roundtables are coming. So
Yes.
stay tuned.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye everyone.
Be righteous.
Yes,
Be righteous.
be righteous.